reacting to all of the best day 3 landing spots, probably another rookie mock. That's what we're going to do in another live edition of Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretsch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretsch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Sean Siegele. You can find all of his great work over at Rotovision. Sean, we had so much fun for 4.5 hours yesterday. At the end of the stream, we were talking about how in the first year we did it on day 3 also, and then in the years since we haven't really done it on day 3. It does wind up being a lot, but we're sitting there talking about how much fun it is. And I mean, the 4.5 hours last night just flew by. So we decided, hey, we'll let the 4th round go a little bit. We'll let some picks go. For those that are listening to this after the fact, we're jumping in with 2 selections left in the 4th round. The draft's been on for about an hour and nearly 2 hours here on Saturday, day 3. So we got a lot of picks that we can jump into and discuss, more picks that will be flying off as these compensatory picks at the end of round 4 finish up and we spin into round 5. We start to get more picks in round 5. But right before we went live, the Kansas City Chiefs, your team, selected Jalen Royals, a wide receiver that you've had an affinity for through this process and been a little bit excited about. You had an audible uptick, excitement in your voice. Oh man, the Chiefs got Jalen Royals before we jumped on. That's a fun one, isn't it?
It is. In trying to catch up on or get a fuller understanding for what happened on some of those picks yesterday when people were moving around, when I realized that the Chiefs had traded up in round 3 to take a corner, then I wasn't super happy about that. I just don't care for the trading up at any point. Now, maybe they traded up to get a corner who should be like a round 1 pick. That's the only excuse for trading up 10 spots, not taking a running back, which again is your biggest need, regardless of what you want to talk about in terms of running back value, and also giving up a 4th round pick for next year. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous, right? And then you look at this beginning of round 4 where the 2 guys that we've been raving about, who really are not that separated from the guys who went at the beginning of day 2, immediately go off. And you're like, well, the Chiefs have lost some opportunity. We'll get to the running backs. There is a lot happening, obviously, at that position, as we talked about last night. But Jalen Royals, this idea, again, of surrounding the players with crazy weapons. We've watched as Liam Cohen has tried to do that with the Jaguars. The teams that were successful that don't have Patrick Mahomes and definitely did that last season. The guys that don't have Mahomes don't have Josh Allen. We've discussed how the Bills don't really appear to be going at this the correct way either. But Ben, I thought that Royals might be a mid-round 2 pick. You've got a guy who is coming out of Utah State. He has some of the injuries, and you can look at some of the per play numbers and even be a little bit concerned there. But you're talking about a guy who boasts a 39% dominator. 2023, he's got that almost 13 ADOT, 95% on target catch rate, 229 yards after contact, 12 broken tackles. Comes back, has the big game against Boise State last year. And then, I mean, this is a player where I think because the long speed isn't necessarily there, you look at some of the guys who have been drafted. I think that DK, who goes off the board as the very first receiver in round 4, is actually kind of interesting. I had put him at the end of my 5-round mock coming in because he does some things that are kind of interesting and has that explosive athleticism. But Royals tied with Matthew Golden for the fastest 10-yard split. The tracking suggested in various drills and that type of thing, and even going back to the Senior Bowl, that he's basically the fastest guy in this wide receiver class with the first step. And we're talking about guys being able to get open. And you think about how the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes have run that offense the last several years where everything is underneath. We're excited about the possibility that there can be more vertical splash plays with Xavier Worthy in the future. We got to see that in garbage time of the Super Bowl. We'll see if any of that translates to actual game action. But this is a player who really rounds out what they can do. Now, there is, I think, a little bit of a potential for there to be a tiny bit of overlap with some of the things that Rashee Rice has been asked to do. But if you think about the collapse from Travis Kelce and how much that seemed to hurt him, to hurt the offense, to hurt Patrick Mahomes, to hurt everything that they're doing. And again, with Kelsey, it's one of these things where maybe he comes back and still does contribute a little bit, but the after the catch of his game, you look at the year by year, sort of over the last 4 years, and even though Kelsey still has meaningful raw volume, the peripherals for him now are they're shockingly bad when you dive into the numbers. He's going to still be part of this offense, but now you have a guy who can get open underneath. And you think about the Super Bowl, you think about the things that went wrong. It wasn't just the blocking, which was, I mean, in both of the Super Bowl losses, the blocking has been so beyond the pale. It's been almost impossible even to fathom what was happening there. But we also watched as Kelsey couldn't get open. We watched as DeAndre Hopkins looked to be like 70. I mean, he had a play where he's wide open. He's stumbling. He barely gets one arm up and is like swatting the ball down. And Jalen Royals is going to be absolutely fantastic for what Kansas City needs. And I think if you're going to fall to this point in the draft as a receiver, you needed the perfect landing spot.
Yeah, this seems really exciting. You mentioned the really high dominator rating. Just for clarification, was that in 2024 or was that in 2023? Because he had his bigger season in 2023, but he played just 7 games in 2024, but was really, really good in those games. So, I mean, was it just the 7 games?
Sort of across those last 20 games, in both seasons, identical dominators there.
Okay.
You look at that 2023 season where he goes over 1,000 yards, 15 receiving touchdowns, very strong yards per team attempt in both years, a little bit better even in the sort of truncated 2024 version of that. This is also a guy who's not really a small player. Sometimes when you think that underneath, but he's going to be able to do that. Ability to get open instantly is going to benefit him more than just underneath. I mean, this is a guy who averaged over 15 yards per reception.
This is super fun. Yeah, the dominator rating was massive both years. So I was wondering if it was just that final year in the 7 games, because it seemed like it might be. I'm looking at the Utah State team page. He had 834 receiving yards in just 7 games. The next best on the team for the season was 526, more than 300 yards fewer, and that guy played 12 games, right? Like, Royals did this in 7 games and was the team's leading receiver for the season by a massive amount. It was not a very good passing offense. And then the year prior, he had 1,080 yards in 13 games, but he had 15 touchdowns. So the dominator rating, looks at that touchdown market share. He had a massive touchdown market share. But also, I mean, did in his 2024 season as well, because he had 6 receiving TDs in 7 games, both years over 40% TD market share, but also over 30% yardage market share. That's why you get we always look at dominator rating at 30% as kind of the true breakout, what have you. He's at 38, 39, as you said, in those 2 years. The second year, the final year, last year, his 4th year, I guess, of college eligibility, but the second year that he really played at Utah State, only in 7 games. So it's adjusted for those 7 games, but to do it in 2023 for 13 games and come back and do it in an adjusted fashion in 2024. Very exciting. This is the guy that started his career when we talked about it at Georgia Military. We were joking. I was joking. I didn't know they had a football program at Georgia Military. He had 7 catches there in 2021. Transferred to Utah State, did not record any stats in 2022 at Utah State. But these 2023 and 2024 seasons, very exciting. And you talk about the size, the athleticism, the fact that he actually has some of the NFL traits as well. For day 3 pick, like you said, a great landing spot. They did bring back Hollywood Brown. They have Xavier Worthy. They have Rashee Rice. They still have Juju Smith, who they brought back. Still have Sky Moore on the roster. I mean, they always have a ton of receivers. I don't think Sky Moore is a real threat, or even Juju at this point. But they'll do rotational stuff. As you're talking about the Kelsey thing, and with this pick, I mean, I think a lot of people thought they might go tight end in this draft to kind of transition post-Kelsey. I think this is an interesting pick. I wonder if they're moving to a post-Kelsey offense that deprioritizes the tight end. I kind of think that may be where this team is headed, especially when you consider that Rashee Rice so clearly in the early part of the year last year was sort of taking over those short to intermediate plays that were the Travis Kelce targets. If they have receivers like Rice, like Jalen Royals, you're talking about the quickest first step in the entire draft here. They brought back Juju. They've obviously prioritized that type of player. And then you have Xavier Worthy, you have Hollywood Brown, more field stretching types. Maybe they're a little bit more of like a 3 to 4 wide receiver set type off, like back like how Mahomes was at Texas Tech. Obviously, ever since Mahomes came into the league, he's had an elite tight end in Travis Kelce. Maybe this next version of the Kansas City offense will deprioritize, instead of who's the Kelce replacement, maybe we'll deprioritize the tight end position a little bit and move into a little bit more of a wide receiver heavy spread type of offense. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see where this team goes, but they do have a lot of intriguing wide receivers now. Obviously, Royals does have competition there as soon as Rice is back, and presuming he's healthy. It seems like in the initial reporting, I don't know where we're at with Rice's rehab, but the initial reporting on Rice was that because it wasn't an actual ACL and it was like the what do they call it? The angle or something, some LCL and something posterior angle, or I don't know. I'm obviously a doctor. Some corner in his knee or something like that. Angle. I can't remember. It was one of those words. That it was something that was more of like a 4-month rehab or something like that. He was going to be out for the year, but hopefully ready to go in 2025 was my understanding. Now I've heard some other stuff that's like, well, it's actually kind of a rare thing, and so we don't really know, and maybe his rehab's even longer than an ACL. I don't know. There's I think there's some uncertainty there, but you have Worthy, you have the possibility of Rice being ready to go early in the season. You have Hollywood Brown back. You have Jalen Royals now trying to find some playing time behind that. I kind of suspect, I guess, as I keep talking about these other receivers, that Royals will be brought along a little slowly, like a lot of the young players have been with the Chiefs, so we may not get a huge 2025 from him, but the fit seems really, really fun long-term with the Chiefs if he's as good as, his profile indicates that he might be. So that's a fun one. Let's go through.
And then just, a couple other little quick notes there. It's not just my enthusiasm. The next gen rankings, if you care about those, had him as the number 6 receiver pre-draft. In looking at a variety of our tools, I had Robert Woods as a super close comp for Royals. And we know he got off to a disappointing start in his career, but then actually had a sustained stretch of certainly not brilliance, but was a very strong player there for the Rams for quite a while. Yeah, I mean, it's a fun selection here.
Very fun. Let's go through round 4 a little bit. We talked before we got off last night, and this is why after we got off, you and I started talking about maybe we will hop on for a little bit of live recording during day 3. We talked about how we thought that maybe the running backs will come off early in round 4. I think I threw out a little note that after we talked about the run in round 4 last year that started at pick 120, that I thought 4 or 5 running backs might go even before pick 120. We were starting at pick 103 in round 4. In those first 20 picks, and the first, I believe it was 15 picks, we did get 5 running backs, including those 2 teams that I highlighted right in the top few picks as big candidates for it. The Jaguars and Giants took 2 of our absolute favorites, 2 guys that you had in your pre-draft top 15. This is the big reason why we decided to jump on. Hey, Bashal Tutin went. Hey, Cam Scadaboo went in the first 3 picks of round 4. Let's jump on there and talk about it. They went to teams that were interested in running backs, were said to be in the market for running backs. The Jags were said to be a potential landing spot for Ashton Ginty at 5 before they traded up to 2 for Travis Hunter. Some uncertainty around Travis Etienne. I still think he's a little bit undervalued at the current moment, and I've always thought that Tank Bigsby was a little overvalued for what he did last year, but he was better. He was fine. He was good. Now I do wonder, okay, is Travis Etienne going to be on the block? That's what you asked me as we were signing off last night. Would he potentially be traded today? Because Tutin is a little bit of a smaller but very explosive back. We talked about him when we did our rookie mock yesterday. You took him as the first player that either of us took that had not yet been selected in the real NFL draft as we were going through and doing a rookie mock in somewhere in the middle of the 2nd round. He does go here as the 2nd pick in the 4th round to the Jaguars. Super explosive. Again, a little bit undersized. I guess in my mind, I've been thinking of him a little bit like, I think I make everybody into Darren Sproles sometimes, but these undersized guys. But with Liam Cohen, who did multi-backs in Tampa, and in a Tampa offense last year that we've talked about had three different backs finish either RB1 or RB2 on different weeks last year. You had Sean Tucker have the 1 week. Sean Taylor, that's a throwback. Have the 1 week where he was the RB2 overall, or no, he was the RB1 overall. I don't know, whatever. Bucky had weeks where he was the what's that?
30 plus
points for each of them. Tucker had the monster week, and then Bucky obviously had several weeks. Rachaad White had some really strong weeks. The key point being that Bucs offense, that Liam Cohen offense, generated a lot of fantasy production for the running backs, a lot of receptions, a lot of opportunity for them. They set up interesting screen looks, definitely a good run game. This team's going to have dynamic playmakers at wide receiver with Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter on the field. The running backs in the Liam Cohen offense in Jacksonville, I expect to be one of the more interesting backfields for fantasy scoring. That's why I was still a little bit interested in Travis Etienne if he was still going to be there. He's been very cheap in early drafts. Now we get Tootin there, and if Etienne especially did get moved and is gone, but even if he's not, if they're willing to use multiple backs like they did in Tampa, if Tootin can carve out any type of a role here, this is really exciting.
It is. We went into the specifics with him last night. We won't go through all of those again, but I mean, his combination of athleticism and peripherals is off the charts. And then you even go back to the season there with North Carolina A&T, you have a lot of receiving value. I think the full profile is there a lot more than it may seem on the surface for him. And part of this is just hope. I have to admit that, you're a little bit disappointed if your favorite guy goes into a backfield with two established runners. But at the same time, we certainly have plenty of reason to believe at this point that the Jaguars see these players as just a guy types of backs in their offense. I mean, you're not talking about using a top 5 pick on a running back if this wasn't an area that you thought you needed to upgrade. So, I instantly am thinking that Etienne and Bigsby, and you can put them kind of in whatever order you want, that these are basically the White and Sean Tucker in this backfield. Now, you would expect probably one of the veterans to be in the White situation from last year where he's drafted earlier, probably not to the extent White was, and then gets the first month work. But we've already witnessed a situation where the coach, and at different points in this, you could argue that Cohen had more or less input, probably less last year with the selection of Irving, but very quickly they were on Irving. It's one of the reasons we drafted him on almost every team, where they're saying this guy is the best running back on our roster. Rachaad White has these weaknesses. Irving already successfully does these things. I mean, this just gives even more reason to believe that Etienne will actually not be on the roster week 1, and that even if Bigsby is the starter, that Tootin will be the guy by week 5, and it's just set up to now have a monster season. That would be my optimistic look at it based on his profile as it contrasts with the guys he's going to be competing with. You don't know the timing. You don't know that your guy is going to hit, right? And when we hit the super high-end outcome with Irving, the thing I would say with Tootin, though, is there are so many similarities, with the big difference being that with Irving, you had to take this big leap of faith on a back that didn't have NFL athleticism. And you're saying, look, the results suggest he can do it anyway, and that the big plays are going to be there. The evaded tackles are going to be there anyway. You don't have to make that same leap with Tootin because he's a Jamal Charles clone. So from that perspective, again, if the Jaguars are telling us they don't like their veterans, then, this is a really cool situation to be in for those reasons that you mentioned. The backs are going to score.
Yeah, new regime, maybe interested in the backs. The way that you're talking through it, it seems like he's going to be a really, obviously the Bucky Irving comparison is super exciting, but a really important part of the redraft landscape. I have to completely agree. This is a profile that we really like. Athletically, from a production standpoint, maybe going to be just a little bit overlooked because of things like size. I believe he measured at 5'9", and just over 200 pounds, very similar to RJ Harvey, who went to the Broncos last night, and we also talked very favorably about and what that could mean. I mean, he's at least a thicker player, but I think people are going to be stuck on he didn't go in day 2, he fell to day 3, but he was the second pick of day 3, right? Like that's going to be the thing that I'm going to care about. And then they're going to be stuck on that there's 3 backs in this backfield as long as Etienne's there, which is, I mean, you brought up Irving. That wasn't necessarily the case with Irving because Tucker wasn't really assumed to be a part of it. It was thought that Irving was like the clear backup. This reminds a little bit to go back to the Saints, which is, you know, I said Terrence Sproles a minute ago, but this reminds a little bit about when Alvin Kamara was drafted to the Saints into a backfield that was clearly a productive one for running backs in fantasy. Those Sean Payton era Saints every year would generate a ton of pass catches and receptions and points and touchdowns, rushing TDs, etc. With Drew Brees and those Saints offenses. And so when Kamara came in, a lot of people didn't like him as a rookie because they had also brought in Adrian Peterson that year. They had Mark Ingram. And you get into that thing of, well, the projections don't really allow a lot of space for the rookie running back to come in and get any work. What ended up happening was that Alvin Kamara was so good that he immediately carved out a role. And then they pretty quickly just got rid of Adrian Peterson by like week 6. And they moved forward in the second half of that year with just Ingram and Kamara. And Kamara ended up being one of the biggest hits in all fantasy that year. My point is, when projections come around, when all that stuff happens, I don't think enough weight's going to be put on the fact that the Jaguars running back group as a whole should be expected to be really fantasy lucrative. So you want to bet into any uncertainty in scenarios where there's upside if it does hit. And then I don't think there's going to be too much weight put on the fact that there's 3 names here and that it's going to be hard to, if I were to do a Jaguar projection right now, I would probably have to give Tootin fewer touches than I want to. And I think for most people, it would mean giving him fewer than both of the veterans, to give both Etienne and Bigsby the top options. And then say the day 3, but round 4 running back rookie is the third guy. He's the guy that we're giving, 75 total touches to is all. Nothing big, because you have to give close to 200 to whichever is your RB1, whoever you like more, Etienne or Bigsby, and then you give 150 to the other guy or whatever, right? I mean, or 100 or whatever it is. There's not that much left over when you start to do a projection and you're like, well, yeah, this guy's kind of buried. There's 2 guys. He needs 2 injuries ahead of him, but that's not the way it works. He may need 1 guy to get displaced, and then he's a part of a committee, and he can clearly show that he's the more dynamic option to a coaching staff that came in and inherited those other backs and didn't seem to like them and does like Tootin. I mean, everything here sets up for a guy that is going to be overlooked because the capital did last until day 3 and because there is this logjam, and yet is a really great play, because if it does pan out, if he does work his way into enough of a workload, and we know we want to bet on uncertainty in running back workloads, and especially want to bet on athletic upside, and we want to bet on, oh, this is a new coaching staff, that this is the guy they picked. If that pans out in his favor, he could be a real smash, like you were talking about. It's a situation that could be very, very lucrative for running back. So anyway, it sounds like my main point there is I don't even know if people will actually get hyped enough on him because he went so late, because so many running backs went yesterday and he didn't. I could say all that again, and I don't think anybody would be like, oh, I'm rushing to take him as high as he probably should go. He's going to be someone who's always going to be, I think, a little bit undervalued, it seems. So that's exciting. Those are always fun ones to kind of to pick out on draft day. The guy right after him may be the same way. Sean, you absolutely love Cam Scadaboo's profile. You compared him to Ginty a couple times when we were doing the running back show, in that his peripherals, I mean, they're closer to Ginty than anyone else. They're, in some ways, the missed tackles forced and the evasion numbers and all of this stuff is very dominant per touch. It's much better than the other backs in the class. And again, it's kind of approaching the Ginty levels, which are absurd. Okay, we just got in the chat here. Jake says Sanders goes to the Browns. So the long national nightmare appears to be over here in the 5th round. The Browns, who took Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round ahead of Shadur Sanders, also took Shadur Sanders in the 5th round.
That's a little bit of a bummer. I was pretty excited about Gabriel overnight.
You're getting stoked about him. This
Yeah.
guy that's 5'11" and he's not an NFL player. Come on.
Was a star for 3 different teams. Come on.
He can't see over the NFL. You've been telling me Kyler Murray can't see over the line for 3 years. You can't see Dylan Gabriel. I saw
He's
someone
going to have at least as good a career as Kellen Moore. You can get him in your coaching fantasy league.
Right. I saw somebody send some Dylan Gabriel highlights and be like, here's some great plays. I started watching them and they're all like on the move and rolling out and like throwing after he gets outside the pocket and has a little bit more space and ability to, I mean, not all of them, but there's a lot of them where it's like, yeah, I mean, I just don't know that he's going to be able to do that in the next level. Like it's
Russell Wilson will tell you this whole thing is a lot like a medieval battle where if you can prolong things until most of the guys in front of you are on the ground, then you can pick your targets and make some really nice everything. Throws.
Yeah, you just need to hold the ball for 5 seconds. All right, let's go back to Scadaboo. We'll get to the quarterbacks in a few, but Scadaboo, a guy, workhorse at Arizona State. The knock on him was some of the athletic testing wasn't great. I think the breakaway score wasn't great. He did have a couple really fun runs against Texas in the college football playoff. I think that gave the wrong impression that he breaks a lot of tackles and then breaks a lot of long plays. You're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that's sort of the concern, right? Is that he may be one of these guys that is very tough to bring down, but also doesn't necessarily have the explosiveness to. He is a great athlete. I think maybe some of the explosion metrics are good, but doesn't have the long speed. Maybe it is. I don't know. Again, you're going to be the one to actually tell me what is right here, but to actually make those broken tackles into huge plays, he's more of the battering ram type. Goes to the Giants. I know there were people in the chat last night talking about who are the Giants going to take at running back. There's been talk that they were going to take a second back, that, Devin Singletary was there with Tyron Tracy last year, that they're not going to just give it all to Tracy. I remember someone saying, I hope it's just not somebody like Scadaboo because they had a lot of Tracy. It doesn't seem great for Tyron Tracy that you'd bring in this really potentially touch dominant between the tackles guy, and then Tracy, the previous converted wide receiver, now becomes sort of the slasher outside zone, receiving back, space back. I think it's a fun tandem for the New York Giants. Like it seems like, but then Scadaboo might be a real threat to him at the goal line is another huge part of that. I do think Tracy, as far as playing that role, could be very efficient on those touches, but it may impact his ceiling relative to what we saw from him last year. What do you think about the fit with Scadaboo?
I mean, it's absolutely perfect, right? I think you got to move him back to sort of the top of round 2. It's interesting. You mentioned sort of these breakaway runs. The player that I think he compares very favorably to is a David Montgomery, where I think you can look at him as a rich man's version. Scadaboo averaged almost 6 yards per carry last season. I was pulling it up just now just to make sure I wasn't exaggerating. The last 2 years at Iowa State, where people got pretty excited about Montgomery because of all the broken tackles, he was under 5 yards in his final year. He was under 4.5 in his second in 2017. So that doesn't necessarily mean that Scadaboo is going to be more explosive. And certainly that's been an issue for Montgomery at the NFL level. We know he's still scoring fantasy points, even in a committee with a superstar. The time for Montgomery was similar to the one that Scadaboo supposedly recorded at his pro day. We do have some better explosion numbers for Scadaboo than for Montgomery. But I think when you look at the overall profile here, the reason that you get so excited is that you have this ferocity in the running approach that even with these guys who, I mean, you think back to kind of Marshawn Lynch, and in the second half of his career, he was very, very good, but so much of what people loved from him was just the furious nature of it, as opposed to even what it was actually doing from a yards perspective. I think we're going to get some of that, but also from Scadaboo, you're talking about a 30% evasion rate, which is a massive, massive number. I mean, the ability to break and force missed tackles is pretty crazy. His 1,144 rushing yards after contact, over 1,100 after contact yards alone last season, that's the most among power conference running backs in the way that SIS does it in the last 5 years. You break all those tackles, you fight for every yard, you end up with a positive percentage of 55%. And again, that comparison to Ginty, who was at 50%, the big gap there actually gave Scadaboo the number 1 ranking, or we'll put him ahead of Ginty in terms of points above average per attempt, right? So you're working through that element of it. That's one of the reasons that when you look at the next gen rankings as well, you have Scadaboo number 2 in the class because this on-field production here was so extreme. But then you have the 600 receiving yards. I mean, then this is a guy with 2,300 yards from scrimmage, a guy with 24 touchdowns. You and I, when we did the running back show, we were going through the game log, and it was just like 500 yards and 4 touchdowns every game, right? And so you think through, what he was doing in those games. And sure, if you play in the SEC, it's going to be tougher than playing in the Big 12. But even then, what he did was pretty astonishing. I always mention that the Arizona State site likes to compare him to Adrian Peterson and Christian McCaffrey. I think the other thing that we want to work through here is just a little bit of skepticism maybe at Tyrone Tracy. I mean, he's one of our guys. We do like him. I think that he could take a second step in 2025. And part of this is just also that the New York Giants offense was not one that you wanted to be in as a runner. But his numbers, which do have a charting component to adjust for some of that, when we look at backs with 75 or more carries last year, he was 40th in points above average per attempt. He had a very, very poor positive percentage. So again, runs that were positive in terms of EPA. He had a very high bust percentage. He had the 4th worst bust percentage in the NFL last year. The only
you think Scadaboo's going to just take his job outright?
Well, the 3 backs who were worse than Tracy were Gibson, Javonte Williams, and Ramondre Stevenson. And if you want to know why we were kind of excited about that Patriots landing spot, you've got the 2 Patriots backs in the top 3 there for high bust percentage. Yeah, I do. I think he's just going to be the starter.
He's just going to be
I think that Tracy's going to be an interesting compliment, but I mean, you don't draft this guy if you're not bought into the idea that he can just go out there and play, and that he's going to set the tone for everything that you do. If you wanted someone, there are other dynamic running backs available. So if you wanted one of the dynamic guys who has better tested speed, you would have just selected one of them. The Giants have a tone setter here who's just going to take a huge number of touches.
Who's going to set tones. So there's another guy that falls to day 3. I think some people might be a little bit skeptical of as a result of that. Oh, he was only a round 4 pick. He didn't get the day 2 draft capital, but he went in the first 3 picks of day 3. Very similar to everything I was just saying about Tootin. It sounds like you would be, I was going to ask you who you would rank higher at this point. It sounds to me like Scadaboo fairly easily, right?
I think so, in part because, again, I mean, you're pretty clearly getting receptions, I think. It would be weird to draft someone who was such a big part of the receiving offense in college and not use him that way. That's one of the reasons why, despite the lack of athleticism, which I think you have to adjust for. I mean, you think about how excited people were for David Montgomery. I mean, they're talking about these huge broken tackle numbers, the yards after contact, all of that. And then he comes in and he's basically a bust before he gets to the Lions. So when we have to at least understand that there are some risks, but I mean, he's going to be the guy there. I think you've got to be, I think both guys are going to be the guy, but there is less in Scadaboo's way than there is for Tootin. I mean, hopefully they both end up at prices where you can get a ton of each guy, but Scadaboo has got a clearer runway.
Yeah, that's a really fun start to round 4. Those 2 backs. Shawn, we said we were just going to do like an hour or so. We're over a half an hour already. We've gotten through 2 players. That's typical for us, obviously. The other backs that went early in 4, Trevor Etienne goes to the Panthers. We were talking through the teams, and I was saying the teams that I didn't necessarily think were a good fit in the early 4th round. They're a team obviously has Chuba Hubbard, paid him, drafted a day 2 back last year, though he did tear his ACL again. They go and they do take another running back to add some depth there. From what I understand, Etienne's profile, not the most exciting. And you think long term that if Jonathan Brooks can still become anything, he's still the more dynamic back. So I guess I'm not very excited about that. You have to tell me a little bit about Woody Marks here, but I want to make a note. The Rams were a team that actually traded up to go get Jarquez Hunter. I know that's a guy that you did like. They said that's their dude. Are they already over Blake Corum? I don't know. Possibly. Obviously not. I mean, with Kyren Williams there, I don't think it's a clear Kyren Williams has got to be the guy forever. That's why people were kind of off Kyren last year when they took Blake Corum. Now this is the second straight year the Rams have done this. There was a report that the Rams coming into day 3 that Hunter was the top player on their board, that after they saw him in their process, that I saw a report that McVay and Les Snead, the GM, had a phone conversation and they decided this is our guy. They really, really liked him. They said the same kind of stuff about Blake Corum. They seem to say the same kind of stuff about every guy they draft, including all their, weird wide receiver picks and everything that they do.
You gotta love being drafted by the Rams because they're willing to come out and say, we love you, which
we think you're the very best player.
You're moving on in your job prospects. You're like, this team, they know how good I am.
But most of that doesn't actually pan out. I mean, we can recall Kyren Williams and Puka. There's a lot of other examples of them being really in love with players that are not necessarily great in terms of how it all pans out. I mean, I'm thinking of Van Jefferson, and then you have Tutu, and then you have Jordan Whittington last year, and Blake Corum was that at the draft last year, and just a lot of guys that don't necessarily actually wind up doing a whole lot. There's even more guys. There's some of those tight ends in there. Anyway, Hunter is a guy I know you liked, and so it is at least a little bit intriguing. These were the other 3 running backs that went in the early part, and then Dylan Sampson went to the Browns a little bit later. We didn't have any other backs in the 4th. I did see we just got Jordan James to San Francisco in the 5th. He's a guy, I don't know if we got it on the show or before the show. We were talking a little bit about him. There were some analysts that really liked Jordan James. I think when I asked you about it, were maybe a little bit more skeptical of his profile. He now slides all the way to round 5 to a Niners team that just always has a lot of backs, right? They're always, Kyle Shanahan's going to take a back in every draft, right? You never know if that means he's going to actually use him. They do have McCaffrey. They do have Isaac Guerrero, who looks like a pretty clear hit. They don't have Elijah Mitchell anymore. There may be some opportunity for Jordan James there as like the RB3. Who of the backs that I mentioned here, mostly I guess in round 4, ETN, Marks, Jarquez Hunter, and Dylan Sampson, stands out the most to you?
Well, Jarquez Hunter and Dylan Sampson are both really exciting. The Dylan Sampson situation there, and Ben, it seems like you even jinxed this by saying that the Browns were going to double up and ruin all of our Quinshon Judkins enthusiasm. This is bad for both guys, right? You're getting 2 of the best. It's not. There were plenty of sharp people who had Dylan Sampson as one of the 3 or 4 best backs in this draft. People who had him above Judkins. This is frustrating, right? Because it seemed pretty exciting right off the bat to get Judkins.
Yeah, it does. Browns. It does seem like it'll be a little bit tricky for Judkins. I've seen some pretty strong criticism from Browns fans of their draft overall so far. They traded back in round 1. They stockpiled a bunch of day 2 capital, 2 second-round picks at the top of the second round, and they went with an off-ball linebacker. And then, the criticism that I saw was, a 2-down grinder, running back was the kind of the take on Quinshon Judkins, which isn't necessarily the limit of his profile. I think it's more pairing that with the linebacker pick, and then also the Dylan Gabriel pick in round 3 was mentioned. You had 4 day 2 picks. 3 of them look like, I don't think people are super upset about Fannin in the 3rd round, but 3 of them look kind of not ideal. And then so far here on day 3, the reason I'm going through all this, they double up. You mentioned on Dylan Sampson with the Quinshon Judkins pick. They're really going after running back, sinking a lot of capital into getting that part of it right. They also double up on that potential project quarterback type play by taking Shedeur Sanders after everyone was shocked that they took Dylan Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders. And we talked last night that they were kind of hoping probably that somebody took Sanders so they didn't have to telegraphed that they like Gabriel more. Now they've brought Sanders into the building, and they've already telegraphed that they like Gabriel more. It does not feel like the most efficient use of all of these picks. Let's put it that way. You've addressed a few needs, not a ton of needs. If you're a Browns fan, and I saw a lot of people saying, well, now the Browns QB room includes, 5 guys. It's these 2 plus Joe Flacco plus Kenny Pickett plus Deshaun Watson. One thing I can say about these 2 quarterback picks is I think we can be pretty confident Deshaun Watson's not playing in 2025. That's my expectation. That was pretty much the discussion right after he got hurt. He's coming back from an Achilles, and then he retore it. And so people are talking, still mentioning him. The Browns can't cut him until next offseason. They're going to keep him on the roster. They're going to IR him, and they're going to cut him next offseason. And it will be interesting to see if he ever plays in the NFL again, if he ever signs again. I would suspect, frankly, no. But at this point in time, you have 5 quarterbacks on the roster, technically. Most teams go into camp with 4, and it's going to be Gabriel and Sanders and Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco. I would assume that's what I'm thinking they're doing, is that they're filling out the QB room. But you were joking that maybe Gabriel could start week 1, or you weren't joking. You were serious. It feels like now it's like, between Pickett and Gabriel and Sanders, it's going to be a weird year for the Browns, right? And Flacco probably is going to start week 1 at the end of the day, right? I don't know. Anyway, you were talking about Sampson and the fit with Judkins. I'm trying to make sense of the Browns' whole draft right now, and it's hard to do.
Yeah, so as we think about Sampson there, one of the kind of cool notes for him is that you probably would like someone who is bigger and more athletic. He could have come through the draft process a little shinier. But this is the guy who really flourished at Tennessee when he and Jalen Wright were together in 2023. Sampson's peripherals across the board were better. Then he breaks out on sort of the full workload in 2024. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that he will be a nice part of that committee. The Hunter one is also just really interesting and really fun, because you have a back here who, again, you probably would like him to be both, bigger and to have had the truly electric athleticism. But as you kind of look through it, one of the things that was sort of interesting about Tutin's results at the combine were that he had, this 4.3 40, the jumps were, all of these things were fantastic. The max speed was good, but wasn't extraordinary. The max speed in the 40 for Hunter was just barely below him. You look at Hunter as this guy who led the SEC in yards per carry. He has over 4 yards after contact per attempt. He's got a 25% evasion rate. He breaks 40 tackles. So again, that's purely the ones where guys get a hand on him. When you think about that for a small back, that's pretty exciting. So I think that Hunter plays a lot bigger than the measurements. And this is a player where his points above average per attempt were almost identical to Bijan Robinson's from 2022 and Bucky Irving's from 2023. Ben, when we did the running back show, we were pulling up, some of the numbers and looking at Bucky and just how crazy his results really were. To refresh everybody, this is a guy who just had a fantastic year on a per play basis. Somebody who had good receiving numbers. I believe he's above 10% receiving share for Auburn in 2022. You can understand why the Rams would be excited, and I do think it causes a problem for those other backs.
Very interesting. As you were talking through that, I was looking into this Woody Marks a little bit. He played 4 years at Mississippi State, then went to USC. I don't know a ton about him. He had an 83 catch season in 13 games at Mississippi State as a sophomore back in 2021. He had 261 catches across 5 college seasons, 4 different years of 47 plus catches. A couple of those early years were under the late, great Mike Leach. And Will Rogers, their quarterback at the time, I know in one of these seasons I'm looking at, he led all of FBS in completions. You're talking about this spread passing attack, and so a lot of completions out there. It looks like Marks was sort of the receiving back, getting a lot of that opportunity. And like his true freshman year had 60 catches for just 268 yards, 4.5 yards per reception, which is pretty shocking in how low it was. And it's not much different throughout the other years. The 83 catch year was only 502 receiving yards. Last year at USC had 47 catches for 321, but doesn't seem to be super explosive there. The missed tackles, forced evasion rate stuff, not impressive. Not impressive yards per attempt at any point in his 5 years. Last year at USC did end up for the first time having over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. He had his first 1,000-yard rushing season as well, his first 600-yard rushing season. The 4 years at Mississippi State never was a big rush volume or efficiency guy. Doesn't really seem like a guy who makes a lot of people miss or anything. Or am I missing anything here? But I really want to ask because of the 261 receptions over the course of a college career is absurd for any player. But for a running back, I mean, that seems very notable.
Yeah, it's exciting, I think, if you get the pick in this range and your team seems committed to you that way. I guess I would be a little skeptical about how much the Texans are actually going to be able to throw to the backs after some of the other things that they have done here. This is one where I think, I mean, we love the receptions. And so that part is exciting. It was consistent throughout. You've explained why some of that probably doesn't mean as much as it might in a different circumstance. I guess this is an undrafted free agent profile, which doesn't mean that he couldn't be good. You talked about the evasion. He was down at 12% in this last year, which is, I mean, guys with that inability to make players miss at the college level simply basically can't, take NFL touches. We've talked a lot about how deep this class is, how exciting it is from an athletic perspective. He's not tiny, but at 207, his athletic numbers also don't play at the NFL level. He will turn 25 before the end of the NFL season. It's just red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. Other than, again, anybody who could potentially catch passes, that still is a cheat code. And you could argue it's more of a cheat code if we're losing a little bit of that out of the running back position in fantasy.
But even when he caught passes, he wasn't necessarily explosive off of that. It does look pretty problematic and questionable why Houston, like you said, it's kind of a UDFA profile. Questionable why Houston liked him there in the fourth with a lot of intriguing running backs on the board, including your guy, DJ Giddens, who just went off the board here in the fifth round to the Colts. What's that?
Okay. The Colts being buried behind Jonathan Taylor doesn't seem great.
Behind Jonathan Taylor in an offense that doesn't seem to have quarterbacks that are necessarily going to be able to throw accurate passes. Not great, but I will say I don't think there's a ton of competition right away. I mean, they did bring in Khalil Herbert, but they have not had a clear number two. Herbert wasn't I think some of the sparkle for Khalil Herbert in the fantasy community after some intriguing bit production for the Bears early in his career, some of that's worn off a little bit. I think it's important to remember this was a day 3 guy in his own right, and then the Bears basically said we don't want him, eventually gave him and didn't seem to be able to find a trade partner, eventually basically gave him away around the trade deadline when the Bengals needed some running back depth. They hardly used him and then let him walk. Herbert's been around now for 4 years, did have some really intriguing stuff early on in his career. And believe me, I was, as much as anybody thought this guy was going to be a pretty good back. But when he's a round 6 pick in the 2021 draft, who's now 27 and hasn't done much in a couple of years, I think Khalil Herbert's, he's less interesting than I think people in the fantasy space immediately associate with his name is what I'm trying to say. And that's the only real competition here for the number 2 job. I'm over on Our Lads, which is my favorite depth chart site. They drop in the picks as they're made. This is just one man's opinion, as far as I know. I think it's Dan Shanka who does that site and does awesome work over there. But he dropped Giddens in right away as the number 2 running back. Even though he's a round 5 pick, he dropped him in ahead of Herbert into their depth chart. So his opinion, sort of similar to what mine would be. At least you have that part of it going favorably, I think, for Giddens. The other name that went off right here in the middle of 5, 2 picks ahead of Giddens, was Jaden Blue, another running back out of Texas. I know not one of your favorites, but also one that you're definitely interested in. I've seen you write about him a little bit. I don't know that we've talked a lot about him, but he goes to the Cowboys, which is that spot that I think everyone was a little bit interested. Who might land with Dallas, as well as, when we got the Denver pick. This looks like, they played Rico Dowdle all of last year, and now he's not on the team. This looks like an opportunity for Jaden Blue to be an every down back, basically. Yes, they went out and got Javonte Williams. They brought in Miles Sanders. I think probably Sanders is the bigger threat. We both are pretty skeptical of what Javonte Williams is going to be able to do going forward after a really poor season last year, 2 years removed from that major knee injury. It's obviously sad, but it's just one of those things where he's just not the same player as he was before that injury and hasn't been for a couple of years now. They signed him for $3 million. The Broncos played him a ton last year because he is a good pass blocker on some of those things. Maybe he will still play quite a bit. Blue, a little bit undersized, another 5'9" guy, checks in just under 200 pounds, but is explosive, right? This is a guy that we should be... He's going to be the most explosive back in this backfield when he's going up against Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. Is that right?
Yeah, I thought that he gave you a chance to have a little bit of an arbitrage play on Brashard Smith. It turns out that he goes earlier, if I'm looking at this correctly. Yep. Smith still on the board, right?
Yep.
Blue can fly. And he was someone who sort of disappointed at Texas and never really taking a larger share of the carries, and yet the peripherals are pretty good for him there. So when you're a smaller back and you're averaging over 4 yards after contact per attempt, you have a 20% evasion rate. So the evasion rate that you need is going to be somewhat dependent on how much you can do when you evade a tackle. So he's one of the running backs in this class who tested over 23 miles per hour in terms of his max speed during the 40. When you can fly like that, you don't have to evade as many tackles because every time you do, it's more valuable. This is pretty exciting. He caught 40 plus balls. The peripherals on those receptions as well were absolutely fantastic. So, maybe you could argue that Texas just simply should have used him more. Certainly if they had, and maybe if he had earned more work. We talk all the time again about the workhorse thing being a skill, and it doesn't appear to be one that Blue has. And so that is troubling if you're thinking, okay, he could take a huge chunk of this Cowboys, workload, opportunity, volume, what have you. But when he's out there, I think you're going to see, maybe you won't see something special. Maybe that's why they didn't play him more. But again, when you have backs who are this fast in a run to daylight era, I think that's something you want to chase in fantasy, especially at the price. We don't know what the price is actually going to be because this is a great situation. And yet, it's, again, should be perfect in some ways because the draft slot should keep him cheap enough to take this bet.
And again, the competition is going to be very weak. Right now it's Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders, Deuce Vaughn, who just doesn't have NFL size, and Malik Davis, who they've had for several years, just kind of lingering. Rico Dowdle is not there anymore. My concern would be, I guess, Miles Sanders is able to rebound enough and look decent enough to be kind of the every down back, and him and then I think Javonte will have a role, but I don't think Javonte's role is going to stay consistent throughout the entire season when you're comparing him to other guys that are able to make some plays when he's not making those plays, because that's probably what I would expect happens. So you'd be maybe a little bit concerned about Miles Sanders being a little bit more of the right size profile and those things. and for more touches and workhorse type roles and everything. But I mean, it has to be said that this is the weakest competition in a backfield that any running back is being dropped into in this class. I mean, he goes here in the 5th round, and if he looks like he's explosive, as you're discussing, then like he's going to look better than the guys that he's playing against. I mean, it's sort of the way that it's going to go. Man, Sean, DJ Giddens goes 2 picks after to the Colts. Obviously, it is what it is. The Cowboys had their evaluation. They went with the guy from Texas that they liked, who went to the University of Texas. What if Giddens would have landed there?
Pick the complimentary player as opposed to the star. I mean, I'm just obviously wrong on Giddens. The teams don't like him. He was so fun. I wish he had gone earlier into a much better spot.
But he's a fun dude. You mentioned his film being really fun. I went and watched it, and I messaged you about it, and I was wondering if you were seeing a little bit of, I said like a little bit of a Le'Veon Bell or an Arian Foster, which I feel like there's a smoothness to him as a runner. But like he breaks a lot of tackles. That's why you like him as well. Obviously, the peripherals are good. The missed tackles force those things, gets into space. I did feel like his long speed was left a little bit to be desired, but then he tested really well. His 40 was actually like pretty good. So I don't know.
97th percentile explosion. You're talking about a workhorse back. Last 2 seasons, caught 50 passes on just short of 400 routes. We talked about how it can be hard for running backs to get air yards. He had over 100 air yards across those 2 seasons, 55 yards after the catch, 21 first downs. You look at the rushing numbers, and for a back who's kind of in that intermediate size, you're talking about good after contact numbers, strong evasion numbers, especially in 2023. In 2024, you have the yards after contact actually jump again because he's got this big playability. You've got a 14% boom rate last year. I mean, what are the teams doing with this guy? I don't get it. Now, I do have to mention that some of the people we had on OT talked about a lack of vision, some of the things like that. And that might play out for NFL evaluators more than it does for people who are looking at some of the peripherals and looking at the athleticism. I mean, if you can't read the defense in college, it's going to be hard in the NFL. I guess I'm just really skeptical of that when you have both athleticism and results.
Yeah, but landing with the Colts, maybe not the most exciting spot, or certainly not if he could have landed with the Cowboys there. But yeah, you had me excited about him as well. Kind of a bummer to see him slide as far as he did. Jordan James, any major thoughts on him going to the Niners?
Well, his peripherals sort of fell apart post Bucky. He's a player who in the committee, or as the lesser part of that, looked really good in 2023. This most recent season, 2.7 yards after contact per attempt, 22% evasion. When you kind of pair that with the physical profile, I thought that this was a UDFA type of profile, or 6th, 7th round, certainly deep in day 3. You're talking about not close to 6 feet, 205 pounds, 4.55, 40, 36th percentile broad jump. Don't believe we have necessarily additional testing. You just need to have better on-field numbers to go with that to be someone who would justify a pick ahead of some of the, I mean, we talk about the fall for Giddens. There are other really interesting backs who have not been drafted at all yet. And so again, it's not to pile on Marks or James, and certainly James, especially, I think one that I could be wrong on. And yet at the same time, these are probably not optimized picks.
Yeah, I was going to go back to Marks. Did you mention ETN there? Do you have any thoughts on him either? I just wanted to
peripherals. His peripherals were good, right? So he's one of these backs where, again, they kind of have that workload thing where probably not a workhorse, but I did think that there is an interesting kind of comp to a James Cook type of player with him. He seemed like someone who was undervalued, maybe in part because you have that ETN name and yet you're not your brother. But at the same time, there's a lot there that is helpful as a part of an NFL backfield. He had some injuries in his final season. And then, I mean, still has the big game against Texas in the SEC championship game. The speed isn't crazy, but it's good. So, I mean, he's the perfect committee back. I guess I wish he hadn't gone to what was already something of a crowded committee where, I mean, man, it just, the outlook for Brooks is really bad, which I think is just so disappointing for him. You're talking about someone's career being basically over before it started.
Yeah, such a bummer there. They also brought in Rico Dowdle. They have Chuba Hubbard. And now ETN. He has the potential, I guess, to carve out a real role here in 2025 alongside Hubbard if he can beat out Dowdle, which you're talking about good peripherals. I mean, I don't think you would have too hard of a time doing that. And as you mentioned, the ETN name, I mean, this is Trevor ETN. We're talking about Travis's brother. And you made the James Cook comparison and said, he's not the same as his back. Obviously, James Cook, Dalvin Cook's brother. I thought that was great. That was just great. Great work.
Well, for people who started playing in the last couple of years, they're like, you're right, Dalvin Cook is no James Cook.
Yeah, exactly. Trevor Etienne, also out of Georgia. Yeah, that's a funny comp there. So he's at least interesting. Let's talk about the receivers. You mentioned, I don't know how to say his name. Chamir DK was the first pick in the 4th round out of Florida. You said he's kind of an intriguing deep threat, right?
Yeah, so you got the huge speed there. And then in one of the pre-draft rookie drafts that I was participating in, his teammate actually went somewhat early. Both of these guys at Florida had interesting results last year, but then had also broken out at previous stops. For him, he put up a 30% dominator at Wisconsin in 2022, in part because their passing offense was terrible. He had pretty solid yards per route numbers in that season. Nothing from a total production standpoint that you're going to really look at and think is impressive. He got the sort of ADOT bounce there with the Gators. He led Florida in routes, but Elijah Badger led them in air yards, yards after contact, TDs, what have you. Better catch rate. He's got the blistering speed, but he is one of these guys. Not that I'm saying this is going to be definitive, but with the speed guys, I do always like to see it backed up a bit with the ability to make some players miss. There are some guys like that still available. He was not in that category, but you're talking about a 6'1", 196 receiver with 4.34 speed. I mean, you get some, Mike Wallace type of comps here. You wouldn't expect that production at the NFL level, but when you're thinking about the Titans, desperately needing to build out this receiving group, it's a little bit intriguing.
The next receiver in round 4 was Dante Thornton Jr. I'm looking at him a little bit. There's not a lot of production, but he didn't run a lot of routes either. 2 years at Oregon, 2 at Tennessee. It looks like he never had more than 200 routes in PFF's database. And these last couple of years was actually pretty darn efficient per route. Like yards per route run were actually really strong. Kind of just a deep threat that would be a high ADOT guy, run deep, but seemed to actually make some plays downfield. Is he somebody that's interesting to you at all?
Well, I mean, you've got the crazy freak score here for him, and you have him leading the nation with the 6 catches of 50 plus yards. So you're thinking we can have a guy go out there, play a few snaps, and on those snaps, he's going to go for, 40, 50, 60-yard touchdowns. Then you could certainly use that. There is that question of, why are there just no routes at all?
Yeah,
right?
178 routes to lead the nation in 50-plus yard catches on only 178 routes is pretty absurd.
So, I mean, that can go either way, right? You can make the case that the team misused him, or you can have this concern of, even with all of that size outfield. I mean, so you're talking about a 6'5", 205-pound guy who ran a 4.3 40. The little note that I had even before he was drafted, but just last night, was that if the Lions were going to go make some crazy, size athleticism pick, why did they not simply pick Thornton? That would have made a lot more sense than picking a similarly athletic player who was even less interesting from a production perspective. If the Lions had drafted Thornton, you'd say, okay, well, yeah, you're going to have some more of those big plays. I mean, this is probably just a nothing move. But again, athleticism matters, right? We're talking about professional sports. If you can get behind the defense, I think it's a reality pick, and a reality pick that's mostly a wind sprint kind of pick, and maybe one where you don't even stretch the defense because you're not on the field. But yeah, I mean, long touchdowns are fun to dream on.
Arian Smith, the 8th pick of the 4th round to the Jets out of Georgia, a guy that I don't know much about, says he's a lean receiver who was plagued by ugly drops. That doesn't sound fun.
Well, again, you're talking about just blistering speed, but I mean, the results have been bad. And so you look at those, the on-target catch rate in 2023, I believe, was a poor 82%. And then so that's the overall number for this last year. On deep passes, it actually dropped to 73%. I mean, you just can't catch, right? And so that is a problem. You also have very little just overall production as a result, but you are talking about someone who can get open and has just elite athleticism.
But at the NFL level, it's just is a day 3 pick because teams want speed for their scheme so that they can challenge safeties. I mean, it just seems like a pretty straightforward thing for probably both of those guys. But to your point, at least Deontay Thornton had some production. Gunnar Helm was a tight end pick, the only tight end pick so far here on day 3 to the Titans. I don't know if you have any huge thoughts there. As we got towards the end of round 4, we hit on 4 wide receivers, and that's where things got a little interesting. Jalen Lane from Virginia Tech goes to the Commanders. There's some opportunity there, certainly, and I know he's a name that is at least one that has been, was mocked and has been talked about. Jalen Royals to the Chiefs, we talked about right away at the top of the show when we jumped on, because he had just been selected right when we jumped on and went to your Chiefs, and we think is a great fit and is very, very fun. Elick, I remember asking you at the start of this show how to say his name again, because I said it wrong so many times yesterday. Is it Iomanor?
I believe so.
Iomanor, something like that. Goes to the Titans, who already took DK at the top of the 4th round. So they take a second wide receiver at the bottom of the 4th round at pick 136. He's a guy that has been discussed a lot and has ex-receiver profile and size, transferred to Stanford. You talked through him on our wide receiver show quite a bit. Probably will be, his success will be determined somewhat by how good the Titans get. If Cam Ward is a real hit and if they can really get good somewhat quickly. And this Jordan Watkins name comes up at the end of round 4, wide receiver from Ole Miss, goes to the Niners. Another one that I'm not super familiar about, although in his notes here, he ran a 4.37 40-yard dash. We got another deep threat that will stretch the field, maybe play on special teams, athleticism, right? Any thoughts on, I guess, Helm or Jalen Lane? Definitely we should talk about a little bit. Io Manor, Watkins. Where do you want to go?
Yeah, let's start with Lane. We'll stay with the receivers. This is an interesting one because, again, you're talking about just absolutely crazy athleticism. The receiver class was weak, but for day 3, you get speed and athletic prowess that is just, again, absolutely crazy. You have the 4.3, 4.40, you have the 1.5, 10-yard split. You have over 23 miles per hour for the max. You look at the other numbers, though, for him as well. You're talking about an 88th percentile agility score, a 95th percentile explosion score. It's not quite to that level, obviously, but there aren't a lot of guys that I pull up in our Workout Explorer, and Tyreek Hill, even as one of the athletic comps that's a little farther away, shows up. If you're showing up with Tyreek Hill, that's pretty exciting. And Lane doesn't have the type of production that would make him like a clear-cut day 2 pick. There's a reason he falls here. But unlike some of these guys who basically have nothing, I do think that Lane is a little bit interesting. It's one of the reasons why I have ranked him a little bit higher. He had 30% receiving share in his last year at Middle Tennessee State. That season, he had 94% on target catch rate. So again, we're talking about better hands than some of these other guys. 19 evaded tackles that season. Then he goes to Virginia Tech, and especially in 2024, Virginia Tech's passing offense was just terrible. They had like 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Within that context, he had a super low ADOT, and that part is also a little bit weird for someone with the crazy speed, but you do get the impression they're trying to get the ball in his hands. This is a player where maybe context has knocked him down, and when you kind of work through that and think about how athletic he is and that he has had some production, I think that there's a lottery ticket kind of path for him that maybe for these other guys, it's really that they're just pure, stretch the defense. You'll play occasionally. I think for Lane, maybe he could actually be a guy who does become fantasy relevant at some point. It's still pretty narrow to get there.
He's got the old John Moore production profile. 10 years ago when I started at RotoViz, I remember John Moore was writing about guys like Tyler Lockett and Antonio Brown who had production in a lot of different facets in college. And I remember he had one cohort where if you didn't need a ton of it, but just this, it's an indicator that they're trying to get the ball in his hands. You talked about the low ADOT. You had at least 200 rushing yards, at least 200 punt return yards, and at least 200 kick return yards in addition to your receiving work as a receiver. That was a pretty positive thing. He has, Lane here, rush attempts in each of the last 4 seasons, his 2 final years at Middle Tennessee State and both years at Virginia Tech. I say rush attempts just like they were using him in that way in some capacity. 3 of those years, 10 plus, including both of these last 2 years at Virginia Tech in the ACC. He had 32 carries total, 167 yards over those 2 years at Virginia Tech, 2 touchdowns. Over the course of his college career, 264 rushing yards, 3 scores, and then, a ton of return yardage. 733 on punts, led his conference twice. Last year in the ACC, earlier in his career in Conference USA and Middle Tennessee State at one point, 2 punt return TDs over his career, 1 in each of those 2 seasons. And then also was a big-time kick returner for Middle Tennessee State. Didn't do that so much at Virginia Tech, but 852 career kick return yards. This is a guy that both teams that he played for gave him the opportunity to return, to get the ball in hand on the rushing stuff. And as you said, the low ADOT stuff, trying to just get him some completions, because I see he had some low ADOT work at Middle Tennessee State as well, particularly 2022. The ADOT was kind of low too there. That was his best receiving season. Does seem like a guy that when he was on a couple of different college teams, they thought this is one of our playmakers. This is a guy. That's one of the things we've always talked about as a little bit of a signal there. This is a guy we want the ball in his hands. We want to see what he can do. I like that you like him, that he's one of the guys you like. Especially you talk about going to Washington, where they like to run a lot of RPOs. They like to do a lot of this ball in hand stuff. They went and traded for Debo. If Debo's a little bit I don't want to say washed up, but a little bit slower than he's been. He was a little bit last year, but it could have been the pneumonia. We don't know. Like, there's a possibility that Debo has a nice little bounce back year this year, I think. But I would think that Lane fits in there as well, and they can do multiple stuff, right? They could use both of these guys. It doesn't need to just all be for Debo. They also still have Luke McCaffrey there as well as another guy who can give you a little bit if he develops, but didn't do much in his rookie year. I think an intriguing path for Lane in an offense that could utilize that type of skill set that his college teams seem to see in him. So yeah, that's all very, very fun. I'm glad you mentioned him. Nothing much on Helm, the tight end.
Well, his drop could be mostly related to that combine injury. I was sort of wondering, I mean, you mentioned the Chiefs looking for a Travis Kelce replacement. This was a deep group. I do think there's a bit of a drop. There's a pretty big tier break after Helm, although Ben, as you're looking at there, has Oronde Gadsden gone?
He has not, and he's over at ESPN. They had him. I went to best available, and they had him like 6 tight ends down still, 7 tight ends down.
So, I mean, he's going to be one of these sort of tweener types of players. And I think that he's kind of if he ended up going to a great spot, you could say, instead of taking that risk on Fannin at a bigger expense, I could just take a similar profile here with Gadsden, where you have a lot of different seasons where he has receiving production. And if you miss on that, then the price to you is basically nothing. Helm a little bit different here. We have him as a guy where, we talked about, why does Isaiah Bond not have more production? Some of it was that he got off to a great start and then got hurt. Why does Matthew Golden not have more production? The raw numbers for Helm last year, 67, 86, and 7, those are going to be aided by participating in that 16-game season. But his yards per route run, at least the way that SIS is going to give routes out, was better than Bond and better than Golden. So you can either look at that as being really good for him or yet another little bit of a red flag for those guys. He's also a tight end. We talked about my concern that a few of these guys who have big names didn't do that much with the ball in their hands. He had the 14 evaded tackles. He had 173 yards after contact. And you think about the tight end position and how some guys who go relatively early, have 173 yards total. He could be another tight end from this group who ends up being a pretty quality sleeper.
All right. So there is a little bit of juice there. We just got
the Titans have really built around Ward after it looking to me, and I'm sure that to a lot of people, that they had nothing when they selected him there at not the 101, but the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. We got a little bit of pushback on letting Ward fall a little bit in our Superflex mock yesterday. I guess I'm getting more and more enthusiastic about him, in part because Isle Manor is yet another. So they take the kind of double dip there in round 4 at receiver. Am I looking at that right?
Yeah, they had 3 4th-round picks, and Helm was in between there as well. So DK, Helm, and Io Manor all go in round 4 to the Titans. Really spent the start of this day 3 trying to build around Cam Ward. I think that's the exact way to put it. That's well said. I'd commented prior that they took the 2 receivers at the start of the round and the end of the round, but missed that they had a 3rd, 4th-round pick and took a tight end right there in the middle of it, and one that you're at least somewhat intrigued by and is pretty intriguing there as well. So yeah, the Titans trying to find something in the passing game. Who do they even have? They traded DeAndre Hopkins middle of the year. They were Nick Westbrook-Akine had a bunch of touchdowns last year, but only had 20 catches. Oh my God, they have Van Jefferson. Oh yeah, Calvin Ridley's on this team. Forgot about him. Brought in Tyler Lockett. Still have Traylon Burks. Still got Chigo Okonkwo. Yeah, I guess Calvin Ridley's your number 1 there. That'll be interesting, the Titans, to see how that all develops. But certainly some opportunity.
It does probably give you a pass now to where you don't have to sprinkle in Calvin Ridley in your best ball drafts if you don't want to. You certainly can. But there are going to be points in the draft where you're looking at it and you're thinking, it's Calvin Ridley. He's got the speed. Where's the market share going to go if it's not to him? Now there are some other answers. And so if you want to pick someone else, you can do that.
Ridley's probably going to get a lot of volume again next year. Keandre Lambert-Smith, another one that I've seen you mention. He goes in round 5. We haven't talked a lot about round 5. It's been going off as we've been recording. We mentioned Jaden Blue and Giddens and Jordan James, a few running backs that went in there. But other than Shadur Sanders, I mean, those backs, that's it for round 5. It's been a lot of linemen. It's been a lot of defenders. We did get Keandre Lambert-Smith here with a 22nd pick, the first wide receiver to go in round 5, and then several more defensive players. Oh, there goes Rondé Gadsden. So that's very interesting. Just happened. 2 tight ends in the last 3 picks. Mitchell Evans to the Panthers, and then Gadsden, who you mentioned may be coming off the board here pretty quick. The ESPN rankings had him like 7th best tight end. And I was kind of confused. Well, surprise, surprise, Sean was right. Gadsden comes off a couple picks after he mentions his name. His dad, I could spend all day just watching the one-handed catches. If you want to go do something fun, go to YouTube highlights, type in Rondé Gadsden and watch this guy's body of work. Type in Rondé Gadsden one-handed catch. He wasn't the greatest receiver in the league when he was in the league, but there are not 5 receivers who have more amazing one-handed catches in my lifetime. It was insane. He had so many incredible one-handed catches. Donnie in the chat says they traded up for him as well. The Chargers came up to get Rondé Gadsden. That's pretty exciting, right? That's a team that has, maybe some past volume concerns, but has the open ability. Oh, and then the Seahawks take Torrey Horton, who I know is a little bit of an intriguing wide receiver profile. So just as I said, round 5 was not very exciting for receiving prospects. We had the Keandre Lambert-Smith pick for the Chargers. Chargers trade back up to get Gadsden. We get the Seahawks taking Torrey Horton. I don't know much about Mitchell Evans here, the tight end from Notre Dame that the Panthers took. Some fun pass catchers coming off the board here.
Yeah, so Lambert-Smith is another one of the athletes, right? And again, he's a guy where I do think we have at least this soft break between the guys with absolutely no production and the guys who have minimal production, but interesting in its own way. You've got that 5th year breakout from him upon the transfer to Auburn. And so you pull him up in the Workout Explorer, you see Garrett Wilson as the physical comp, Chris Olave, Ladd McConkey. Anytime that you pull out those 3 names, again, you pull out the 3 names super good, then it gets you a little bit excited. This is a player who in that last season gets the strong yards per route numbers there, scores the 8 touchdowns, has the 30% dominator, excels after the catch with 222 yards after contact, right? He fixes his drop issues. He's down to 5% there. He becomes a vertical option with a 13 ADOT. He catches 17 of his 18 catchable deep targets. I mean, you're talking again about a 5th year breakout, but that's better than a no-year breakout when you have guys like Rashad Bateman, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson in your physical comp group.
That is exciting. What about Gadsden? Also to the Chargers. They have Conklin, who they brought in, Tyler Conklin. They brought in Will Disley last offseason. They have a couple depth tight ends. They had like Stone Smart last year. He's no longer on the roster. I mean, it looks pretty open to me for him if Gadsden can actually turn into a bit of a player. You mentioned he's a little bit of a tweener, though, right? And so now the Chargers have taken Trey Harris, Keandre Lambert-Smith, who you just got done talking about as this really great athlete, and Gadsden, who's like a good athlete for a tight end because he's kind of a tweener. He's more of a wide receiver / tight end. Will he ever run enough routes is kind of my concern. But it seems like these guys are just trying to get big, athletic ball winners so they can be run based and then do the play action shot plays. Is that going to be wrong?
Well, it's interesting because we were pretty excited about Trey Harris yesterday, and now they actually have added quite a bit of competition to where I think purely from a potential volume perspective, you have to be a little bit more conservative. I do think that this also starts to push us into the direction where Ladd McConkey is a little bit overvalued in early drafts. Not that he's a bad pick, and certainly anytime that you are going to select a second-year player who was a star as a rookie, I don't think you can go too wrong there. But you probably don't have now this expectation of the insane target volume that it looked like you were going to get pre-draft. Gadsden is interesting because, I mean, he has an almost 1,000-yard season back in 2022 in 12 games, a 33% dominator that season, which you don't get from tight ends. Now, again, this is a sub 245-pound tight end, so it's a little bit of a different category than when you're talking about, say, 260 plus. But then he comes back with 900 yards again in 2024. So when you're talking about getting, potentially a pure receiving tight end, but a receiving tight end where the background is really strong, right? You're talking about 2 900-yard seasons. We can lose track of it a little bit because you're talking about the massive numbers coming in this year for Tyler Warren and Harold Fannin, but 2 900-yard seasons for a tight end is pretty exciting. The 2023 season, you have the injury. Power Conference tight ends last year, he had led the group with over 1,000 air yards, scored 5 touchdowns on deep passes. There's a lot here from a receiving perspective that you just really don't get at the tight end position. And obviously, if you were bigger, you'd go earlier than round 5. I don't know if the round 5 draft slot answers our questions as to whether or not you're actually going to have an NFL role.
Right. What about Torrey Horton here to the Seahawks? The chat seems to like him a little bit. I mean, I remember looking at him a little and seeing that the targets per out run were pretty obscene in a couple of his recent seasons. I mean, 26.7% in 2022, 32.1 in 2023. He only runs 96 routes in 2024, but 39.6 on that very small sample. But the 2 years where he ran over 400 routes had a really massive targets per out run number at ADOTs that were in the double digits. This isn't like small, low ADOT manufactured touches. The weighted targets per out, massive. The efficiency good enough that his yards per out run in all those seasons, over 2.7 by PFS numbers, very, very high. A lot of total air yards, a lot of targets, plenty of production. Is he small? Is that the deal with Horton?
Well, you've got the small school issue. You have the final year injury situation. But no, I mean, you're 6'3", 196, and then you come out and run a 4.4 40. To me, that tends to eliminate the red flags that are maybe there when you have that obscene production that you're talking about. George Pickens is the name that kind of pops as the physical comp for him there in the Workout Explorer. You've got a guy with, and then you talked about the production. The 2022 season, I believe it's a 48% yardage share and a 67% touchdown share.
Those numbers sound made up.
I mean, this is a production machine, right? So again, you can say a little bit like Ricky White for UNLV. Well, he's doing it against competition that is very different than what the big time guys are doing, but I mean, he's good.
They had 12 passing TDs. He caught 8 of them. They had 2,361 passing yards. 2,300, very low. He threw 35 of those on his own, but he caught 1,131 of the 2,300 passing, almost 50% of their yards. They had another guy who had 424, and then no one else over 120. They just had a whole, their third leading receiver, you're down to he had 119 yards on the season. You're just down to the filler guys. You go look at like a team's production to see how dominant these numbers actually are when you hear these percentages sometimes. And it's just funny to see the gaps between him and all of his teammates. I mean, he was the only guy in this passing game. Led
huge, yards per team attempt, great numbers after contact, great evasion numbers, good hands, a strong mix of, depths that he's drawing targets at. Again, you've got to adjust for the level of competition, and that's why he goes here. But he was one of the guys that we kind of had, targeted as a sleeper. I don't know if round 5 moves it one way or the other, but this is a guy who's fun to talk about.
Yeah, definitely interesting. We are to that point now where it's like, well, I mean, they got drafted, right? Like, it's kind of hard to be all that excited.
With Horton, it's going to be catching passes from Sam Darnold or Jalen Milroe. So, moving up your board.
I'm skimming through your write-up. You had a write-up over at RotoViz last night after our marathon stream and before waking up this morning and getting back on air with me, updating your rankings after day 2. You moved Tyler Shuck into the 5'11 in Superflex. He made it onto the list. I'm laughing as I scroll through and see some of the late round names here. Yeah, Horton's a guy that you had in the 4th round before knowing where he was going to land, whether he'd be drafted at all. I think that the Seahawks landing spot is optimistic. Certainly, you have Kupp, who they paid a decent amount of money to, but is getting up there in age. Obviously, you have JSN, but they bring in Marcus Valdes-Scantling, who I don't think is a guy that's difficult to displace if you're an actual player. And then, I mean, it's Jake Bobo. They've brought in like River Craycraft and Steven Sims this offseason, a couple other names. Like most of their wide receiver group is new names because DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are not there anymore. They did draft Elijah Arroyo in round 2. They already had Noah Fant, and then they also had AJ Barner, who had a decent tight end 2 or decent season for a number 2 tight end, NFL tight end last year as a rookie. So we're probably headed toward a lot of 2 tight end sets here, and then it's JSN and Cooper Kupp. MVS maybe the 3rd receiver, but if Horton can get into that number 3 receiver range, maybe if Kupp misses some time, certainly the Rams thought that he was not going to stay healthy much more. It seems plausible that we could get some opportunity in Seattle for Horton. We haven't had any more offensive skill positions go here, Sean. We've been going for about 90 minutes. We thought we'd go for about 90 minutes. We are at that point. We're getting to the end of the 5th round where you're like, the draft capital at this point isn't much different, especially when you get into 6. Isn't all that different than just being a UDFA. The landing spots can be somewhat interesting. I mean, obviously it matters that they got drafted, but it doesn't change your perception a ton. Should we fire up another rookie mock real quick now that we have a bunch more names? Where does Scatabo move into? Where does Tootin move into?
Yeah, let's do it. Do you have some names here that who haven't been drafted and you're crushed because you can no longer realistically draft them in your upcoming leagues?
Not really, because this wasn't a very deep class. The quarterbacks all ended up going. Oh, Brashard Smith. You've really liked him. It would have been nice to see him go. Position change guy. You were talking about dreaming on him as sort of the next Tyrone Tracy. It would have been nice to see him go here in round 4 or round 5 and not fall away to round 6. Damian Martinez, some people really liked as a 2nd round guy. There's some running backs here for sure. Ollie Gordon was a guy that I thought was at least fun enough to dream on if he got a landing spot. Yeah, I mean, there's several running backs. We'll probably see more go. There's not a lot in the receiver group. Isaiah Bond was, there's some off-field concerns there, but also not a lot of production, as I understand it. And so that's a big question. Tez Johnson's extreme size issues. Xavier Restrepo ran like a 9.15 40. I can't remember what it was. It was very high. You've mentioned Nick Nash and Ricky White as some small school guys that if they land in round 6 in a great spot, I might get a little bit excited about. But no, I don't have anybody that I'm. Anyone for you?
Well, the other two names, I think for me, that unless they've gone here in the last few minutes, I believe that Devin Neal and Taj Brooks are still available. And I did think that they were going to go.
They are both still available. They have not gone. Neal was the top one there, best available on ESPN at running back. They have Taj Brooks as the 6th best. But you like Smith even more than those guys, don't you?
I do. Yeah. Neal was one where I didn't think that he had a standout trait and that was problematic. It's one of the things that I've kind of focused on all the way back to, say, 2013 when we got started with this stuff, that you did need to have that at running back. But the consistency of his production, again, there are a few names who have gone that had undrafted free agent profiles. Neal and Martinez definitely should have gone ahead of them. Yeah, 3, 4, 5 running backs here still to go, which one of the reasons why, if those are the names that teams had, they can certainly target them very, very late. I don't think we have to give up on running backs. Some of the other positions, if you're not gone yet, it's not great.
You already updated your rankings to include the Scatabo and Tootin picks before we even got on. You are on top of it. Yeah, let's throw up the. This is yesterday's mock. I'm gonna duplicate this onto a new tab. Delete all the names. We're going 3 rounds this time, Sean. But you have to go 101 this time.
Well, I don't want to break things from the start, so let's have GT there as the topic.
I should have just left all the names on there, and then I'm just going to change them as we go. For now, we're gonna just leave all the names on the pre-drop. I'm gonna stick with McMillan at 102, so that puts you on the clock at 103.
Well, I mentioned we got pushed back on Ward yesterday. Let's reach for him here and take him at 103 after they. I mean, if you made a bunch of day 3 picks, then your QB is set, right?
So Cam Ward goes 103. I'm going to take Travis Hunter to 104, bumping Travion Henderson from that slot. Where do you go next?
Henderson.
You're still Henderson, and then I'll take Hampton, Hampton going 106 in our mock here may be the only place he goes 106. He's a lot of people's 102, but that's sort of the top 6, right? It feels pretty firm.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. You could break the tiers in different spots, and originally I think that you could make a compelling argument for Judkins as part of that. I do think that today actually hurt him and moved him down quite a bit. That was the other one. I now have Judkins in both green and red.
Right. Are you making changes while we're recording? Or was that? Oh, Samson went before we came on. I was like, I thought Samson went while we were on. It's like, how did you update this already? Oh, that's fun.
So I'm taking Harvey here.
You're going straight to RJ Harvey at pick 107. You have the Samson pick as pretty concerning. I'm going to take Colson Loveland 108. The more I was talking yesterday about not having done a whole bunch of research on the tight ends. The more I looked at it and dug into it, I got pretty excited about Loveland there with the Bears. You got the new coaching staff. They went out and got him. He does have some pretty intriguing elements to his receiving profile, which you've talked about. You've comped him to Sam Laporta, maybe even. Obviously, with the Ben Johnson tie-in there. I'm excited. I'm excited about Loveland, I think, and especially in tight end premium, which we are counting this as. So he'll go 108.
This is a tougher one for me. I think there are 4 picks that are very even. I wish that the Texans hadn't also drafted his college teammate, but I'm going to take Jaden Higgins.
Jaden Higgins moves up to 109 ahead of Judkins. That makes my 110 tricky. I would have taken 2 guys ahead of Higgins here. I'm going to move Dart to 110. We talked about this yesterday, that we kind of let Dart slide a little more than probably intended to. I think he belongs after. I said probably ahead of the tight ends, but I changed my mind overnight. I think he belongs behind Loveland, but ahead of Warren, if that makes sense.
I'm going to keep arguably reaching for the guys I reached for yesterday and take Burden here. I just think the situation for him is arguably going to end up better than the situation for Loveland when we think about the Bears and how things move forward in the future.
Well, I'm going to take Judkins at pick 112. I do think the significant draft capital difference, you really like Sampson, but the significant draft capital difference there is meaningful to me. It seems like they really liked Judkins. They went out and got him with a top 40 overall pick, the 4th pick of the 2nd round. They got Sampson much, much later after he sort of slid into day 3, probably another guy they liked. And I don't know. To me, you can read that as they're saying, well, there's another back that we really like, and we wanted to address this position. I think Judkins still has a path to be their main dude and the guy that they really wanted to be kind of the early down workhorse this year and in the next couple seasons.
I think that makes a lot of sense. He actually was the top person on my updated board. I think that there is the potential. I mean, one of the things we're looking at with running back is you need to fall into kind of a lucky situation where you're not dealing with the same issues that most of the rest of the running back group in any given year is. And you do that through teammate injuries and other types of things, and or just having a very weak depth chart that forces a team to use you more than they probably should. I think that part of that path is closed off for Judkins, and then potentially some of the efficiency issues we talked about yesterday pop back up. But yeah, I certainly like Judkins there. We've got picks, Ben, at the tail end of round 1 in our draft. And I mean, Judkins is not someone I thought would even necessarily fall to us. If he falls there, we would be pretty excited. But
so that's the end of round 1. Real quick, before you go 201, Jackson Hawes, tight end from Georgia Tech, goes to the Bills. Anything exciting there here towards the end of round 5?
No, but I'm too excited to make my pick here of Cameron Scattaboo.
Scattaboo, all the way up at 201. Very interesting. Yeah, you like him to take over the Giants' backfield a little bit. You talked about that earlier. I was going to ask you something else. Oh, I was going to recap round 1 for the audio listeners. So it's Ashton Jeanty, I'm just going to go Tet McMillan, Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Travion Henderson, Omarion Hampton, RJ Harvey at 107, Colson Loveland, Jaden Higgins, Jackson Dart, Luther Burden, Quinshon Judkins. When you took Higgins 109, I said there's 2 guys I would have taken ahead of him. It was Dart and Judkins. But I don't think Higgins is not a part of that tier. And Burden also at 111 definitely belongs there. I feel like the top 12 is another sort of tier break here. I mentioned that after pick 6, it felt like a tier break. I feel like there's another tier break after 12. I don't know if you necessarily agree, but I'm very comfortable with Ibuka being behind that. You take Scatabo here at 201, suggest that as well. At day 3 back, oh my gosh, you fall all the way to day 3, Sean. What are you thinking? Tyler Warren slides out of the first round here, and I'm going to take Ibuka. I'm going to make you decide when you want to take a tight end in one of these mocks that we've done, because I still don't think you've taken a tight end in either of the two mocks that we've done, but I'm going to go ahead and take Ibuka at 202. I think at that point, you like his high floor profile. I think he's going to be good. There's a potential for Evans to miss time I talked about yesterday. I mean, it looks like he's in a real log jam, but Godwin's coming back from a significant injury. Evans is, I mean, the NFL's Iron Man, right, at wide receiver, but also did miss some time with a hamstring last year and is eventually he's taken a lot of hits over his career. I think when it does end for Evans, it may end somewhat quick. We'll see. Not rooting for that. One of the best wide receivers of his generation, obviously, but you think 2-3 years down the road, Ibuka, I think Ibuka will have had opportunities to play where those guys have missed some time and will have potentially emerged into a situation where he can be sort of a clear starter if he's good enough. I know you have some questions about that part of it as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the tier break after 12. I completely agree. That's where the tier break is in my rankings up on the site. I was kind of hoping to take Ibuka there, but I really have Ibuka, Golden, and Tyler Warren just completely overlapping each other. I think all three of them. I mean, we're obviously down on them as it relates to consensus, but we're not like over the top out on them or anything like that. For me, the Warren landing spot was so bad, and I'm having a hard time getting over it because he's somebody who you did kind of want to draft around 108 and think this could be, again, not a Brock Bowers, probably not a Sam Laporta, but someone who could like get you into that gap below, say, Bowers, McBride, Laporta, when you're trying to build out these dynasty teams that are going to carry you through the next decade. I've also continued to get higher and higher and higher on Golden's landing spot. But then it wouldn't be right to draft a receiver with Golden's profile over a tight end with Warren's profile. I got to go with the guy who actually did it on the field in 2024. Tyler Warren.
Tyler Warren is where you landed. I made us an available list down here. So Ibuka goes 202. Tyler Warren goes 203. For those watching on YouTube, the production values are sky high on my for those who are listening and not watching on YouTube, you'll just have to imagine how beautiful this.
I'm pretty sure YouTube itself saw, and they've really started promoting the live stream now. They're like, look what Ben's doing.
I'm going to take Caleb Johnson 204 here ahead of Matthew Golden. I did it last night. I'm going to stick with it. I don't think you're as excited. I mean, I know you like Caleb Johnson, but I don't think I was just looking at your list that you released earlier. You have him a little bit further back. You're maybe not quite as excited about the Steelers situation. I think the Steelers situation is pretty good. I think they're going to run plenty. You still have Arthur Smith there. I do think, the receiving stuff may not be massive, but Aaron Rodgers, assuming he's there, does like to throw to the backs a decent amount. Yes, you have Jaylen Warren there. Yes, it'll be a committee, but it'll be a committee where they can both get 15 touches in the same game because Arthur Smith's your head coach. They're going to play slow, but I mean, Caleb Johnson put up production at Iowa where they play slow as well, and they don't do a whole lot on offense. I think this is a dude that with his size, maybe the 40 isn't perfect, but it's not terrible when you adjust for the weight and everything, and his overall production, the things that he can do, and the fact that they took him on day 2, they seem to like him. I mean, they use Najee Harris year after year after year for so many touches. I really do feel like we're going to get plenty of Caleb Johnson touches and volume and usage. They like Warren too, but I'm pretty into him. I think 204 is the farthest I'm going to let him go. I don't like Matthew Golden. I think Matthew Golden's a bust. So I'm taking Caleb Johnson.
I do like the strong takes on that. The Golden bust is good. I can tell you weren't thrown by the list of BSS comps I tossed in there just to kind of round things out with Mikel LaShore.
Oh, the Mikel LaShore and Carlos
Zach
Hyde.
Moss,
and
Carlos Hyde, Alex Collins, Tanks Bigsby. I do think that undersells what he is athletically. One of the things I would point out is that it's not just about timed athleticism. It's about like actually getting downhill. They had a back in Najee Harris, who's a freak athlete, but even going back to his college days, almost all of it was side to side, and there's just not a forward element. You've got to run forward. Caleb Johnson, almost the exact opposite end of that, where not great tested athleticism, but he gets downhill. He does get yardage, and that part I think will be very helpful for them.
He's
I guess
a fun dude to watch. Probably overselling what I think I'm seeing on film and those things, but I mean, a guy who's that productive in the Big Ten against, Big Ten defenses, a running back who's just grinding it out on an offense like Iowa that doesn't really have a passing threat and basically is just like, we're giving the ball to the running back every time and throwing him screens in every single play, and he's just doing it. Workhorse is a skill, all that stuff. Like, I think he's going to be good. He's going to the Steelers, which are the NFL version of Iowa, right? Like, that's...
I just think the Steelers low-key end up just giving you a ton of low-value touches, which that part doesn't appeal to me. And, maybe it's just something where the younger back, the new player, and maybe he's just so good downhill that Jaylen Warren is the clear number 2. I guess I think that is tricky both because Warren is so good and just it seems like a really problematic committee, and that it could just be so even. I'm going to take Golden here.
You're going Golden here. You're not necessarily buying that. I think he's, 205 isn't that far. I guess I want to ask you how concerned you are about the things that I'm concerned about, which is that he didn't earn volume at 2 different schools, and it's all seemingly a projection on intangible stuff that's not there in the production. He had 987 yards last year, but per route, not very good in any facet. And then at Houston, it was worse. It was really bad per route. I mean, he's just a bad first-round pick. He's a classic overdraft, is he not? I mean, am I like crazy here?
No, I think that you are exactly right. I think that there, arguably is something to be said for the fact that if you look down the stretch of the season, now, if this is a 23-year-old fifth-year player, it's different. You're not looking at the stretch of the season and saying, okay, this is an emergence. You look at it for a 21-year-old early declare or a young early declare, and you've got the 7 for 86 against Kentucky, 3 for 73 against Texas A&M, 8 for 162 against Georgia in the conference championship game. Nothing really against Clemson, but then 7 for 149 and 1 against Arizona State. Again, sort of underwhelming in the CFB semifinal. There's something to be said for simply being a first round pick with that type of athleticism. One of the things I think is weird about people getting so excited about the speed with him is that this is just a draft where that part is not unique. You could have taken that kind of player in round 5, round 6, round 7. You didn't need to do it in the middle of round 1. But at the same time, I guess I've come around to loving this landing spot as well as simply, again, at this spot, 205 is not, actually being in favor of him at all, really. At that point, I think I have to have the humility of saying this is a first round pick, a young guy, in an offense with a quarterback and coordinator that I like. And even though I still like Jayden Reed a lot more, it's actually one of the teams where you could be the wide receiver 1 right away, and then you're off to the races. I think this is another tier break for me though, too, where like after this.
Yeah, I don't know where to go. But I was asking you to sell me on him, and I'm underselling the 3-year early declare youth aspect of his profile. You kind of went there right away when you're talking about the down the stretch production for a guy that was 21 is only in year 3. Having said that, he would have had to come back out next year and had a really productive year to then be a 4-year guy who had one really good season. And then I'm like, yeah, and he had a fun stretch at the end of year 3 there. Like, I still would be like discounting that he didn't do anything prior to his 4th season, even if he had that, which he doesn't have. Like, he's not very productive. Anyway, it's a challenging one. I also, Sean, need to ask you, since you're the king of the pronunciations, the Seahawks just took a tight end named Robbie. This is a guy from Alabama. Robbie, it's Ouzts. And I'm pretty sure this is from what's the movie with Will Ferrell and Chris Kattan with the What is Love? I'm pretty sure it's Utsa. Is that how you say this guy's name? Where they do the What is Love? A Night at the Roxbury is what I'm trying to think of. Anyway, let's get back to this mock draft. I'm at 206. I'm gonna go Bashaw Tootin because I do think we're at a point now. Well, no, actually, I'm gonna not do that. I just saw Jalen Milrow's name. I'm gonna say Jalen Milrow, who I really like in round 3 to Seattle. If you can get him at 206 in a super flex, I think I kind of forgot about him again. But where do you have him? Okay, you have him at 209. So you're not maybe quite that optimistic. I don't know. I think you got to take him in super flex in this range. 206 to 209. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think that's it's certainly an upside swing. It's another one where I think if you have stockpiled a lot of picks, you get fired up about it because this is the way to address the QB. It's probably not to take Cam Ward at 103 as I did in this draft, but it's to get the player who has more upside in the second round, doesn't cost you as much. If you have 3 second round picks, you can make that move. If you only have 1, you probably want to go in a direction where you're actually adding to your starting lineup or to the edge of your starting lineup in year 1. And I will take Tootin.
You'll take Tootin. Yeah, Milrow, I think I was going to say, is an intriguing one to think about the depth of the league you're in, where like we have an FFPC league where the roster's then cut down to 20 players. He'd be a tough one to stash if you have some real depth on your team in that type of a setting. But if you're in some of the dynasty leagues that, the other leagues I'm in are often 30-man rosters. If you're in a 30-man roster league in Superflex where you can stash a developmental QB5 or QB4 or whatever because you have the roster space, then I really like Milrow here. It's trickier if you're not going to get – potentially might not get early information. It might be something you have to stash him for a full year and kind of see how that develops, wait for Sam Darnold to sort of play himself out of a job over time, etc. All right, I'm up at 208. Tootin off the board. I've got all the names there. I'm trying to see if anybody who went today jumps up for me. Not really. I think I'm Trey Harris here. I think I took Fannin ahead of him yesterday. I got a little hype on Fannin. I think it's Harris ahead of Fannin. The landing spot, although the Chargers adding more receiving competition, certainly a bit concerning. But I think Harris got the capital we were looking for. And then some. More capital than I think could have really been expected for him going in round 2. Maybe not more than could have been expected for him, but certainly was on the high end of his range as a second round pick here. A guy whose production profile in college was just off the charts. We talk about, keep making all these caveats that, okay, it was a certain type of offense, this, that, and the other thing. He's a 5-year player, started earning good targets per route in his second season and was pretty efficient on it, 23%. Then it was 26% in his third season, 28% in his fourth season. And then last year is when it was just absurd. 38% of his routes he was targeted on, and a massive yards per target of 13.6. His yards per out run was over 5. But my point is, he was efficient enough in 2023 as a 4th-year guy and earned enough volume per route that his yards per out run that year was over 3, which is still really, really high. You have back-to-back huge, 3 straight years of 900-plus yards, and he hasn't run 400 routes in a season either. The Chargers brought in McConkey last year. He's another guy who had limited routes over the course of his collegiate career. Once he got into the Chargers, they played him more full-time. If Harris can get out there and be playing full-time in this offense with Herbert, I just think he's a really good fit with Herbert. And then their offense probably going to be a little bit run heavy, but then play action, shot plays. I don't know. I think he's going to have his big plays for sure. He's going to have his moments. Could be a fun best ball pick this year. Late round rookie wide receiver to tack on to some builds.
I like that. I definitely had him in that spot overnight. I do think he's going to fall in the next update because of the guys they added today. Not necessarily fall a lot, but a little bit. Partly because, you kind of go back and forth on like how enthusiastic you want to be about someone that you already wanted to be kind of crazy about. I'm going to take Fannin. He's probably going to move ahead of Harris for me in the rankings.
Fannin.
I mean, now that he's got both Gabriel and Sanders, he can't go wrong.
Right. I mean, jeez, he got so much quarterback depth. Fannin, obviously, a really exciting production profile as well. Everything I just said about how Harris's numbers are so fun, that applies to Fannin as well, whose targets per out were almost as high as Harris's this past year. And Fannin, is he a 3-year early declare? Or was he in college for 4 years? He's a 3-year guy, right? Or am I missing that?
The 3 years at Bowling Green, yeah, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 21-year-old. And we talked so much about the 2024 season, but the 2023 season was good as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a good player. He wasn't anywhere before Bowling Green, I guess, was kind of the question I was asking there.
No. Ben, you had mentioned with Lane earlier about the additional production. One of the things that makes me think about is that, I mean, Fannin had 1,550 receiving yards last year. They also gave him 9 rushes where he went for 65 additional yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, and another touchdown. And he had 4 rushing TDs as a freshman. Right, that was like his most productive. He had 5 rushing TDs over the course of his college career. Yeah, as a freshman, he had 10 carries and 4 rushing TDs. He only caught 19 balls, but they were like, well, we'll use him as a fullback. We'll just use him as a power back. He's a fun dude.
But don't say the word fullback on the show.
All right. 210. I got to consider a lot of options here. I think I'm going to go. I got to go our Cowboy back. I'm going to go Jaden Blue here. Ooh, I think that landing spot is just too good for him to fall out of the second round. That could be a real volume opportunity situation early in his career. Oh, chat's saying Ollie to Miami. We got a new pick here in the 6th. I was just looking 2 cornerbacks to open the 6th, but with the 3rd pick in the 6th round, Ollie Gordon goes to the Miami Dolphins. He's a guy that had a really tough 2024. In the pre-combine write-up, you got me a little excited about him. You wrote about him somewhat favorably, said, that was in part because Oklahoma State's offense completely fell apart, and it's really tough to be that great when your offense completely falls apart. It felt a little bit like Chuba Hubbard's final season at Oklahoma State, which also was not quite as good as his prior seasons. Gordon's prior seasons really dominant, showed all this stuff, but then the combine was bad for him, right? He really didn't show the athleticism that you're going to need to show. He does go in early round 6 to Miami. It's interesting he goes to Miami, who seems to care so much about athletic traits, that may be one of his big issues, but maybe he's going to be the Thunder now to Achan's Lightning.
Well, it does raise questions about how they're seeing Jalen Wright, someone that I was more or less trying to unload this offseason. That doesn't mean that'll be the right choice. The combination of traits or production there with him is pretty interesting in that even with all of that rushing that made him such a superstar in 2023, he had a bunch of receiving yards as well. I think that probably appeals. And the Dolphins are probably one of these teams that believe the scheme can get him that runway. And so you see in 2023, when he has a chance to get going, he's very difficult with his size and his, again, you don't have the athleticism, but you have this sort of combination of vision and intuitiveness that if you can get him on smaller players as a huge back, then that is very favorable for you. Yeah, I mean, that's exciting. It's a good spot, right? You probably would need an injury to Achane, which we certainly don't want to have happen, for it to really blow up. But I like that. You get into a team where you think about the production that backs have gotten through the years for the 49ers. If you're going to go in round 6, and this is absolutely perfect for him.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear. I'm upping the production value further, Shawn, on our beautiful board here. I'm trying to get us some names to
Dylan Sampson.
Yeah, I'm trying to write down all of the names that basically by draft capital that we could actually feasibly pick here so that we have them somewhere. I already have Giddens there. I'm going to put Ollie Gordon on here. Anyway, you are up at pick 211.
I was going to say that I've already demonstrated good restraint, but actually every pick to this point was one I would have needed to make. I'm going to make the homer pick here. I had Jalen Royals at the 212 in my pre-draft rankings. I'm going to take him at 211, even though he fell deeper than I had hoped, but he fell to the right team.
Jalen Royals, the slide ends with the Kansas City Chiefs. And so he lands at 211. I'm going to go Kyle Williams at 212. I think we got to get him in here before we exit the second round. I guess look at that. You have him a little bit lower. You have him in the third in your most recent write-up. I guess I do see the opportunity there being pretty exciting if he's able to make something of that, because Drake May is really good, and I don't know, some of the film guys seem to really like this dude. He got some real draft capital, 5th pick of the 3rd round. I don't know. I'm not actually like that excited about Kyle Williams. I've not selected him. I see where you have him ranked, and I'm remembering that I was kind of talking crap about him yesterday.
Well, it was a lot of the notes that you made yesterday that influenced where I have him on my rankings. So it seems like all of
I was talking him down, right?
So that you could grab him in round 2 of our rookie mock.
I wasn't very thrilled about the lack of production until his 5th year against basically an independent WAC schedule, and never really produced against any good teams, and wasn't very good with Cam Ward in his 4th season. But you mentioned, that was his 1st year after a transfer, but there's a lot of concerns there. Anyway, I've taken him. He's on the board at 212.
I did want to note for you that in sort of the live wide receiver prospect lab rankings that Blair was doing last night during round 2, that Williams actually does move up ahead of Abuka and Trey Harris, which, again, I don't think that you want to rank him ahead of those players, but it gives a sense of why, we didn't go out of our way to draft Abuka super early in this exercise. Also wanted to note that his top comp in the box score scout was Emmanuel Sanders. I thought that was somewhat interesting. Obviously, Emmanuel Sanders, not an impact player, but not an immediate impact player. He did eventually explode with his second team when he got with Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos. Well, last night, Ben, you were blocking me from all of the tight ends, and today I am in a better spot. I'm going to go ahead and take our guy, Terrence Ferguson, here. I've been working around in my head to the idea that the Rams have gotten their George Kittle. I do want to note that Ferguson has that 4.63 40. He's got the 92nd percentile explosion. How that compares to Kittle is that Kittle's a 4.5 guy with 99th percentile explosion. So still a little bit of a difference there.
Still a bit of a gap. He was the other one I was looking at 212. And then when I was like, I don't know why I took Kyle Williams, I would have said Ferguson next there for sure. I will go Dylan Sampson, who you are saying is a huge issue for Quinshon Judkins. And I mean, it is pretty open there in Cleveland. I think there's certainly opportunity for him to be getting early touches. You never know what's going to happen with Judkins. There's a possibility that Sampson just looks better right away, or over time, or that Judkins has some type of an injury, or any number of things. So early in round 3, I do think you want to take a profile that is going into an uncertain backfield, even if he's the second guy that was drafted in that backfield.
When we're looking at some of these backfields that got more congested, we're now into the range where it's tough because you don't want to end up having to sit on a guy for a long time and burn that roster spot. But the player with the most upside, I think, here is Jarquez Hunter. You mentioned how excited the Rams were for him. I think sometimes you get this situation where you're sort of always wrong on the timing, where, maybe this year Blake Corum ends up being the guy. He displaces the previous starter there, and you get a gross committee, and Hunter is the third guy. I think Hunter immediately jumps to that backup spot and probably forces a committee in the second half of the season. And then you're really off to the races in 2026. We know that the Rams at times have picked a guy and gotten him huge fantasy value. Now that we're here into round 3, I think that Jarquez, especially coming off of just the crazy numbers that he put up with Auburn, is a very fun pick.
Devin Neal just went off with the 8th pick of the 6th round after the first kicker. But an interesting spot. He lands in New Orleans, where we know Kendre Miller was never able to stay healthy. Alvin Kamara is extended. But Devin Neal could be Alvin Kamara, an older back's backup this year. Now, it's not going to be an exciting offense by any means, but the rest of the guys that they've brought in, I mean, they brought in CEH late in the year. They still have Jordan Mims on the roster. It's not a stable depth chart. So Devin Neal landing there, 8 picks into round 6 is at least mildly interesting. We also got Kyle McCord going to the Eagles. They get another developmental quarterback. What do you think about Neal to the Saints? Not obviously great draft capital, but as far as the opportunity in front of him.
No, that's the perfect spot. Perhaps you could get the Cowboys doubling up and you'd have the path to be the actual starter. Certainly Kansas City would still be interesting, but outside of those spots, again, probably not for 2025, but 2026, maybe you're already looking at him as the workhorse. Anytime that you fall into a pretty soft depth chart, either because the starter is aging and the backups are more or less non-existent, and you're a 3-down guy who has demonstrated that ability, yeah, that's perfect for him.
I'm going to go Jalen Knoll, who has slid a little bit to 304 here for us. I say slid just from the perspective that he was a day 2 pick, went in round 3. It does seem like there's going to be a little bit of a crowd ahead of him to get on the field early with Christian Kirk there. I don't know that I'm expecting a lot from him in 2025. And then you have Tank Dell probably back in 2026. So, I mean, the Texans smartly stockpiling weapons, but they also took Jaden Higgins, obviously, at the beginning of round 2. They take Knoll in round 3, his college teammate. Knoll, a little bit more of a slot guy. We'll see what he's able to do in terms of early opportunity. I think there's a reason that we let him slide here to the 3rd round, but he's worth the pick here.
Yeah, Knoll, just sensational from an explosiveness perspective, both in testing and when you watch him play. He's a real mismatch against those collegiate defensive backs. But I've kind of been perusing all of these running back picks to see if I feel like the combination of the player's profile, the new landing spot, kind of where they went, if there's somebody that I want to grab. I mean, obviously, Giddens has been my favorite guy. I mean, maybe you could make the case that even though he showed out a little better toward the end of last season, that because of all the injuries and the collapse after his epic season, that Taylor, fits more into that Kamara mold as eventually giving way than that I think we probably want him to fit into. But since this one is up in the air, I'm going to go with the guy that I have labeled as the perfect super sleeper and grab number 74 overall to the Denver Broncos, my guy, Pat Bryant.
Pat Bryant at 305. I'm going to take Mason Taylor at this point. Just, again, kind of a draft capital pick, but I think tight end premium, we're into the middle of the 3rd round, and he was an early 3rd tight end, wasn't he? Mid 3rd?
No, we're talking number 42 overall pick here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, number 42 overall. There you go. 2nd pick, 2nd round. So probably, I mean, maybe there's still a couple interesting running back / wide receiver picks that we can make, but he's got to come in here pretty quick as well. So taking him at 306.
I can't hold off. I'm going to take Giddens.
You're going to take Giddens. I wanted to see how long you would let him go. I was playing a thought experiment over here. I don't like Arroyo's fit as much, but Taylor seems like he could be the starter. So I do think as a tight end he belongs there, but Giddens probably comes in here at some point. Now the question is, sort of how absurd do I want to be? Because there are still some day 2 guys. I mean, Jack Beck is available as a 2nd round wide receiver, but I'm sort of into like Jalen Lane in the end of the 4th round, or even Torrey Horton in the 5th round. But I think I'm getting a little bit too excited potentially.
I mean, both of your choices for the Cleveland Browns starting quarterback is still available. I mean, how far are you going to let Sanders drop?
How far are we going to let Tyler Shuck drop is the bigger question. I'm going to take Jack back. I don't think he's any good, but look, it's 308.
I've got quite a few guys I'm still pretty fired up about here. I do think that once you get into this range, you're sort of in that maybe trade back a little bit and get, something for next year, get even more of your guys. Then I mentioned that we have a lot of 3rd and 4th round picks. Looking at the names here, so it gets flat, I think, maybe in that 302 range, but then, you think who's going to be there middle of the fourth. And that part is actually still, pretty interesting. You mentioned looking at Jalen Lane. I really like him as a potential option at this point. I'm going to take Eilmanor, who shouldn't have fallen to 136. We did a little bit of a misdirect, a fake spoiler yesterday, where it seemed like that was, a perfectly justified spot for him already. And when you have Ward and you have a Tennessee depth chart that doesn't feature, it now features a lot of interesting names, but no like full block out the player type selections. I think he's maybe going to be that day 3 instant impact player.
I like that. The Steelers just went Will Howard, quarterback from Ohio State. That is at least vaguely interesting. I mean, they don't really have a quarterback right now. I still think we're going to get Aaron Rodgers there. I'm going to go Lane. I think Lane fits with what the Commanders do well. That diverse usage we were talking about is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, the Commanders landing spot, the other one that is absolutely perfect there. Trevor Etienne. He's going to be instant part of that offense and has the peripherals, he's got the right traits to be a guy who doesn't need a lot of work to score fantasy points.
I'm going to go Devin Neal, who goes in the 6th round here. But I think, it's a tough offensive situation. But you're starting to talk about the 3-12 in rookie drafts. The ability to potentially get on the field early is pretty enticing. I think there's some real potential that he's like playing alongside Alvin Kamara this year based on who else is in that backfield. And if Kamara misses time at any point, that he's the guy that actually plays the most as a result. Who are the other? You said there's a few other guys that you were pretty excited about. Who are the others?
Well, I think you could take all 3 of those tight ends. And then, your discussion of Gordon and the fit there. Gordon's going to be a 4th round pick in rookie drafts, and he's going to be a 4th round pick where, this is always the case with 4th round picks. He's probably going to just disappear, but man, that type of potential, I think, for someone who after 2023 was being talked about, in the same type of vein with Ashton GT, is something that once you're in the Miami Dolphins system, tempting to go back for me even and replace the ETN pick. I think those guys are a lot of fun. And then we still do have, I think we hit on my favorites in Eilmanor and Lane, but there are 2 or 3 other receivers like Lane.
Who would be your top receiver?
So I think that Keandre Lambert-Smith is an interesting, not necessarily a problem for, but when you think of these drafts where a team double dipped at a position and the later guy is better, I think you have some fun potential there. And then for all the reasons that we talked about with Torrey Horton, I think that one's also very interesting.
Wait, did you say Keandre Lambert-Smith's better than Trey Harris?
I did. I slipped it in that he's going to be the guy.
He's going to be better than Trey Harris. Okay. All right. I like that. A little bit of heat there coming late. Yeah, Gordon was the other one when I took Neal here at 312 that I was looking at that I do think makes a lot of sense here. There's so many fun running back picks to make. I was throwing out some guys that I felt like kind of needed to go. Mason Taylor, Jack Beck, etc., or whatever his name is, Betch, whatever. Probably in my own drafts, if I'm on the clock, I'm more excited to take the running backs in these spots. And sort of most of the spots throughout. Yeah, there's a lot of fun running back picks to be made. Shawn, we're approaching the 2.5 hour mark after 4+ hours. I gotta I got to go see what the family's up to. I got to go do some other stuff, I think, here with my day. And just kind of check in on the rest of the 6th round and 7th round rather than sit here and talk with you about Will Howard's fit with the Steelers, you know. But this has been a blast, as always.
Yeah, so much fun. Hope everyone enjoyed. Thank you so much for sharing the time with us.
2 kickers have gone. Once 2 kickers have gone, we got to shut down the stream, right?
Ben, 2 kickers have gone, but who are the top available at running back? Because
you still want to see these guys go. Damian Martinez, Brashard Smith are the top 2. Yeah, I mean, we should be seeing these guys. LaQuint Allen.
There's still the dream that Elijah Mitchell will not be the starting running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. It's flickering.
Who do you want?
Still alive. Man, either Martinez or Smith would be absolutely awesome. Tosh Brooks is fantastic too. 3 guys here who could be NFL starters.
If one of those guys lands on the Chiefs, you heard it here first. He goes all the way up to the 205? 210? 305 maybe? Yeah, probably more like 305, but he could be really fun. When do the Chiefs pick again? Not for a while. Kalel Mullings, running back from Michigan, just went. Isn't Donovan Edwards the running back from Michigan that was considered more draftable? Anyway, we're at the point where we're drafting guys that I don't know. I don't know who they are.
Well,
looks like he's a former linebacker who moved to running back in the 2022 season.
Crazy. Before we get too wound up about what teams are doing here toward the end of the draft, we'll close it out. It's been another special live episode of Stealing Bananas. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, is Ben Gretch. Make sure you are subscribed. Stealing Signals, bengretch.substack.com. We'd love to have you guys over at RotoViz, coupon code RVRadio 2025 at checkout. Also, Ben, Volume 3 of the RotoViz Rookie Guide is coming out very shortly. It also has a coupon for the site as well. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.